Hi guys. Okay, in a recent video I talked about tornadoes and being weather wise, and I alluded to a couple of stories about tornadoes in there, and several of you have asked for me to relay those, so this is what I'm going to talk about today. But a quick reminder, today being Thursday, tonight my live will be 8 p.m. Central Time as opposed to 7. Remember last week we talked about that. So tonight it will be 8 p.m. Just a quick reminder. Okay. Tornadoes are a big thing down here in Alabama. And I have heard it said that Alabama has more tornadoes than any other state in the nation. A sheer number of them. And that I've also heard it said that America has more tornadoes than anywhere else in the world. And I can believe that. So it's just a factor of life down here. It's something that you got to deal with. You become rather conscious of and to understand what's going on. And I covered the signs of it before. But let me relate a couple of personal experiences of mine of being there when it happened. Myself and my blood brother David Hobbs and another gentleman by the name of Arthur Bradley had gone to place on the river to camp out for the weekend, and we had set up poncho tents. I think Arthur may have had a hammock, and we did the usual stuff, you know, cooking on a fire, etc. And finally it was time to go to bed, and we had had a pretty bad thunderstorm rolling through west of us, and we expected it to pass to the north of us. But weather reporting in those days was not what it is today. We didn't have instant radar on the phone, so once you were out here, you were on your own. We'd been hearing that booming for 2 hours. And what had happened was this big supercell had rolled up, and then it had stalled out. It had hit a front it couldn't push through. And rather than it, moving on, it had kind of just sat in place for probably 2 hours, and then it finally started moving again. Well, this built up energy and everything, like I talked about, that edge of that front line pushing it, tornado formed off of it and rolled out. One of them short duration. And so we were in our tents, separate tents and hammock tent, and you start hearing the wind go chaotic, like I talked about. And then suddenly you hear popping limbs as trees are being flexed in ways they can't react fast enough. Instead of just leaning with the wind, they're having to whip around, and they can't react quick enough. So big limbs start snapping off and start falling. And I was in a poncho shelter, so I rolled out first, and between the lightning flashes, I could see a major front line, like right there. Big and bad. The temperature dropped suddenly. I mean, it was like you were suddenly in air conditioning, like you had walked into a walk-in freezer. And then there were little bitty hail. You could hear them hitting the leaves. I had alerted my David and Arthur. David had got out. Arthur had stayed in his hammock. He was dry. He didn't want to get out. Well, of course. But then the wind, it's like you just turn the volume suddenly up. And out of this chaotic wind, there's a loud noise that was right there. Now this is true here in Alabama. Been true of most of the things I've seen of this. This may not be true around the world, okay? But let me relay this to you. You have a front line like this, and like I talked about, it's a circular rotation. It's on the edge of a front line, edge of a thunderstorm, whatever. And due to the way it's rotating, remember it's catching and rolling, it's coming out and it's rolling back toward the cloud. Excuse me. Yeah, it comes out and it rolls it back. Comes out and rolls it back. That wind dropping down, hitting and doing around. So it's rolling toward the cloud, and then it detaches and it's rolling that way. So it's always rolling toward the cloud. If it was a top, it would be spinning toward the cloud. Now, If the front line looks like that and it detaches here, it wants to run up. And usually, 99 out of 100 tornadoes are going to come from some form of southeast going to some form of southwest going northeast. Now, it may not be like that, it may not be that, it may not be like that, but it's usually from here going here, okay? Which, from your perspective, if this is the front line like that, bowing in, it's going to attach here and it wants to roll and go under, but it can't. The wind's pushing it out. So it rolls along the edge of it. So on a map, this would be southwest. This would be northeasterly. It's a southeasterly going northeasterly, roughly. Knowing that, I already knew the orientation of the compass where we were sitting at. And I knew from that direction was southwest of our camp. So if I hear the big noise of a bunch of trees snapping and everything, and it's that way, we're not really in danger because that's north of us. If it's over that way, that's south of us. It's going to follow that kind of line. But if it's that way, that would be southwest, and that would be southeast, and it would be coming through here. So it's kind of like being in a highway and multiple roads. If I'm in lane 3, the only thing that's important to me is lane 3. Lane 5 is going to miss me. Lane 2 is going to miss me. But lane 3 is real important. And so I had mentally orientated myself with that weather to figure out if we hear that sound over here, we're in trouble. If it's either any other direction, we ain't in no trouble. Right? The sound came from that direction. So we literally pulled Arthur out of his hammock. And we had a road we could go down this way. And we could hear trees snapping that way coming this way. Knowing it's going to be fairly small, we hauled butt. Probably 75, 100 yards. Until finally it got too close. The wind was obviously coming and we took shelter behind a big tree. Used it as a windbreak. Laid down on the ground, and if that tree started to come over, we could roll. And we knew that. And it passed probably about 75 yards above our camp. It blew down trees. One tree fell down in our camp. It missed everybody's shelter, but it fell in the middle of us. Whop. You know, big old pine. So it did go through, you know. But again, part of that weather-wise is realizing that it's going to come somewhere out of southwest and it's going to go somewhere towards the northeast. That way, northeast. Diagonally across the clock. It's going to come from 7 or 8 o'clock and it's going to go to 1 to 2 o'clock. Okay, that's the line of it if it was a clock face. And we got out of it. But then, you know, we broke camp and we're coming back out whenever David's dad showed up because he knew where we were. And he was worried that he knew there was a tornado had just come through that area. And so he had heard the report from farmers in that area, knew we were in that area, and so he jumped in the truck and ran out there. He knew where we were camping, or roughly. Again, he was our ghost rider. And so when he gets out there, we're literally loading stuff in the car when he pulls up. But he was coming to see if we were hurt or whatever. That was one. Another one was we were canoeing, me and a close friend. And again, one formed and it crossed the river. We got up under a railroad trestle. And it crossed the river about 100 yards from us. And the wind coming off of it and everything, you see trees suddenly go snap, 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 and they fall in the river. And then you see a big hunk of water rise up because it's sucking that water up, right? And it's slinging it. It's like being in a car wash all at once. But we took cover up under a railroad trestle. Big old beams that we could get behind for that. And then the worst one of all of them was at Fort Bledsoe. Now, Fort Bledsoe is a historic park in Tennessee, not terrible far from Nashville. And it was something of a thing back in the colonial days, back in the pre-Revolutionary War days, that they were holding a southeastern rendezvous at, and I was at with some friends. And it's up on top of a high ridge, and there's a valley down below it, and several other things. And we had 7 tornadoes form on that ridge. Not exactly on top of us, but awful close, and then they would go down. What was happening is that front line would come across and hit this high ridge. It would give it a wind shear, and any of that spurling would break loose. And this front's like a freight train going from southwest going north, and it would detach and then run down into those valley, which is where that small town was down there. And it was devastating up there. And there were, I believe somebody had told me at the thing there were 1,500 of us in that field that night in canvas tents, you know, doing Revolutionary War type, you know, living history. And the wind hit my tent, which was a big wall tent, and I had it set up for storm. And when it did, I make it so my side walls will raise up. They're not anchored to stakes in the ground. I've got long stakes. So the side slides up and the wind comes in, that pressurizes the tent. So literally we're sitting on our beds, you know, and we got lanterns going, and suddenly it's like, and the whole tent pulls out like a umbrella with wind blowing, 40, 50 mile an hour wind blowing through the bottom, you know, at your feet, and whoa, it would go opposite. And all the sides would bow way in, and then it'd go again, and then it'd being inside of a bellows. And it was just one after the other, boom, 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 an outbreak. And the biggest was an F3. When the F3 was coming by, and it passed within 150 yards of us, and the mainline winds were well over 100 miles an hour, slamming in that tent. I'm standing there holding the ridge line, trying to hold the tent up. I've got big ropes on the side. I'm staked out as best as you can. I had followed the old U.S. military manual from 1910 of how to stake for storm for canvas tents. That's what I'd read, and that's what I'd utilize for this. And my front tent pole broke on the outside. That slacked the line. And so there were 2 ladies who had taken shelter in the tent with me because their tent had already gone down. And I had one of the ladies hold up the upright pole, and I grabbed an extra tent stake and a tomahawk, and I just went under the side and pulled the rope tight and restaked it to pull it tight because you don't want it flapping. And when I turned and looked, there was that big tornado going by. And it blew down tents, it tore up trees. It was just, until you've been in something like that, you can't stand up in that wind. It just slaps you like an empty Solo cup, you know. And it'd be gusts and everything, and then a mainline wind hit me, and when it hit me, I flew backwards probably about 14, 15 feet. It just took me off my feet. Like I said, like you just slapped a Solo cup. And I went 14, 18 feet down and landed and rolled. And knew to get low then. And then that wind dissipated, and then I went back up under the tent. In the tent with the ladies. We had hail that had rolled in. Like I said, hail's a big indicator. Now, what to do when you got hail? You got to put something over you. And so I had told a lady whose name was Lisa, who was actually a trauma nurse, and she was the more calm of the 2 ladies. Lisa Johnstone was the lady's name. I said, if I say now, you're going to get in the floor, you're going to wrap your legs around the other young lady, bear hug her from the back, and you're going to take this heavy plastic tub, one of the heavy totes, turn it upside down over your head and hold it up off your head if it starts coming through the top. I got 2 more people to get. My sister was camping about 3 tents away, and another good friend of mine, Don Davis. I had to get to them. So I had to set them up and go. It did not come through the top of the canvas, but it was scary. It was really scary. I have been out west in tornadoes and seen just all the windshield, all the glass busted out of a car. where fist-sized hunks of ice are hitting, you know, I mean, just like it's a cannon shot, and it's just beating a car like a sledgehammer. And the final story that I'll relate was I was out, that was when I was driving an 18-wheeler, and I was out west, and I saw this tornado, and there's nowhere to go. And ahead of me, I saw one of those. What they do is they run, I guess, phone cable or some sort of cable in the ground alongside the road. And then they make these, you know, you've got farm fields on either side, and the road is a little bit high, so you're kind of running on a levee. If the plains was to flood out here, you'd be on a bridge, a levee. And they do that, so the roadbed's a little higher than everything else. And so every so often they'll cut a bridge through so that if you do have that kind of flood, water could flow from this side through and the road don't act like a dam, right? And you'd see these out west in Kansas, North Texas and stuff like that. And they'll run that power cable up across the telephone pole across and back down rather than just burying it deeper, I guess. And you'll have a little bitty old bridge that's only about 25 feet long, 30 feet long. It's just enough to let water go. You know, that's it. And so I saw that, so I hammered down to get to it. And I was pretty sure it was going to pass a little north of us. It was a big one. And so I put my truck off onto the ditch on the left, just rolled it down in the ditch, get as low as I could. And then I jumped out, but what I did not realize was there was a lady in a small car following me. And when I jumped out, she came running up going, "What are we going to do?" Because there it was. You're already feeling the winds. And so we went up underneath that bridge and did not try to get up you couldn't get up in the fork of it. But you got concrete pylons that hold up the bridge, and they're about a little bit bigger than a telephone pole. There's bunches of them down there. It was something to hold up, man, like 6 across. And so I pushed her up against one and took my belt off and came from the windward side and threw my belt around and wrapped around, like hugged her with us hugging the pole, and told her, "If I go, you stay," you know. And the wind and the sand ate the t-shirt off of me. I had really long hair back in the days. I know a lot of you guys ain't gonna believe this, but when I retired as a district manager, my ponytail I could tuck into my belt in the back, and everybody knew Blackie had long hair. And so my head was sore for weeks because it had pulled my hair so much. But that thin cotton t-shirt, there were holes big as my hand, and my back was like a super bad sunburn. I'd been sandblasted is what had happened, and that t-shirt just about fell off of me when we got done. And for a year, maybe 2 years after that, I'd be taking a shower and sand would roll out of my skin where it embedded in my skin. It was a real scary moment. But this is your only choice. There's, you know, there ain't no place else. And as far as you can see, it's flat. And so it leaned my truck over. It did not roll it, but it leaned it over, so that we had to get a wrecker to come out there and rock it back on its wheels. But it leaned it from vertical like that up against a bank on that side. But that bank didn't offer any protection. I mean, what I had on this side was not going to block what was coming from. I didn't have a ditch I could really get into. That low ground on the left I took my truck off into would have offered no protection. It was so wide and broad, it was like, you know, obviously during harvest time they run tractors down here. So it was like a 2-lane street down there. It wasn't anything I could get below. And so the only thing I could physically hold on to was that bridge. And the lady wasn't hurt, well, was in better shape than me. She had short hair, and apparently my hair slapping, you know, side of her face, she looked like she had the sunburn. That was my hair slapping her from severe. And but the whole thing lasted 3 minutes from the time we wrapped around that pole that wind howling through, and then it was obviously past us, was 3 minutes. And you will remember it. I'll put it that way. So those are some of the tornado stories. Now, I've heard and seen other things from other people, talked to them, people I trust. I've seen a lot of trees go down into houses. I've seen cars get just squished by trees. I've seen glass sucked out of a pickup truck sitting on the side of the road. One passed by close enough to pull the glass out of it. And finally, to end this, I'll tell you about Chris McDaniels. That if you'll go back and check, in 2007, my hometown, Enterprise, Alabama, got hit by an F5 tornado. And that's not something we usually have down here in my part of the South, but it hit us that time. It collapsed the high school, and 7 young men and women lost their lives, where a wall collapsed in on them in the high school. But Chris was coming to pick up his daughter in his Ford pickup truck. And he knew nothing about the tornado or nothing. And he's coming down a big 4-lane road, and it comes down a hill kind of steep like that, and J-hooks to the bypass. And as he come down that hill, he ran into the tornado. It had come off of a bluff, lost ground effect, and was reacquiring ground effect as he literally ran into it. But he couldn't see it because of all the heavy rain. And so for what Chris told me, he said that I was running along and the windshield wipers on maximum, and then suddenly I couldn't see, and I kind of looked out the side to figure out where I was. I'm trying to stop, and it's like I hit water. You know, when you're driving along, ooh, sudden deceleration. I went, oh crap, you know. And then there was this feeling of turning. And he thought that, and he said, I looked at the speedometer, and my speedometer dropped, but my tack went wide open. And I thought I was in water. And then when I looked back out the window to the left, I was seeing the tops of pine trees. He was 70 feet in the air. He had picked up the truck he was in. He was seeing the tops of the pine trees out the window at 70, 80 feet up. And then 1, 2, all the glass sucked out at the same moment. The windshields, front and back, and 2 side glasses just boom, gone. It turned the truck around in the midair like that and sat it on top of a building. This is, remember I said he's coming downhill, so it grabbed him here. It carried him about 150 yards up and sat the truck down on top of a building. That quick. You could say he was a bit upset. And when the film crew got to him, he was openly crying. I don't blame him. Not everybody gets to see their own death, you know. That storm was so bad, that tornado was so bad, they found parts of the high school scoreboard 200 miles north. They found a lady's pocketbook way up in South Carolina. They'd got sucked up into that and carried that far before it finally dropped it out. They're nothing to laugh about. But the bottom line is, you have to make yourself aware of them. You have to understand their basic path, their basic mode of operation. They're going to probably come from that general direction. They're probably going to go in that general direction. So if I hear them there or hear them there, I'm okay. But if I hear them anywhere over here coming, I got to move now. I got to take cover now. That's things you got to educate yourself to. It's a hard lesson to learn. It really is. And it can be kind of scary. But with a little bit of knowledge and understanding and a little bit of watching the skies, it might not be able to sneak up on you. Hope you enjoyed this, guys. Please leave any questions or comments down below. I really appreciate it and be glad to answer what I can. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.